Welcome to another episode of Arbitration Life. I am Janette, Brin.
And I'm Hana, Doumal.
So I traveled recently. Oh my goodness. For the first time in over a year, I needed to travel, as I was happy to because I really needed to see my son, who, as you know, lives in St. Thomas. But the COVID-related costs, on the other hand,
Not so good.
But I won't get into that, but what I would like to highlight is the number of Caribbean countries which seemingly appear to be moving towards phasing out the mandatory quarantines, which has had an adverse effect on tourism and even for locals who might need to travel. But the whole thing got me thinking about COVID-related disputes. I'm curious to know I was curious to know, and still am actually, to know what has been happening in the world in that regard. And did you know, Hana, that a court in Ontario, Canada, recently overturned arbitration preventing vaccination of children? I came across this article in SLAW Canada's legal online magazine that stated the Ontario Superior Court of Justice recently released an appeal in AP versus LK of an arbitration where the arbitrator concluded it was not in the best interest of the two children of the relationship to become vaccinated. You have to check out this article. I just thought it was just pretty interesting, you know, and just interesting to learn that COVID-related cases are really coming to arbitration.
Yes, they are.
Versus litigation. So yeah.
No, absolutely. And I think arbitration actually is the best way to resolve those COVID-19 related disputes because one of the advantages of arbitration is that it is faster than litigation, and another one being that it's cheaper than litigation. Now, another great advantage is that remote hearings were already happening in arbitration before COVID, and arbitration practitioners were already used to deal with remote hearings, meaning that less arbitration hearings were canceled and postponed compared to litigation hearings. And in fact, many courts had to postpone hearings because of the pandemic, which had and still has a negative impact for resolution of those disputes. And some COVID-related disputes went to arbitration precisely because lawyers decided to go to arbitration instead of litigation to avoid having hearings canceled or postponed. But shall we move on to today's guest now?
Yeah. Today's guest is a specialist in cross-border corporate disputes, international commercial arbitration, and multi-jurisdiction litigations. Currently based in Hong Kong, she is a partner in the international arbitration and litigation team at Withersworldwide. Boasting over a decade of experience, she has advised clients in Asia, the Americas, and Europe on all phases and aspects of international arbitration and litigation. She's a regular speaker at conferences worldwide, giving lectures and trainings on international arbitration and cross-border disputes. Please welcome Sherlin Tung.
Welcome to the show, Sherlin.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Such a pleasure. So Sherlin, let me just repeat. It is indeed a pleasure to have you join us today. Yes. I just wanted to start by asking you your thoughts on COVID-related disputes. Do you anticipate these type of disputes coming to arbitration?
For sure. I mean, we have both an upside and a downside to COVID. I mean, we've all kind of been stuck in our respective jurisdictions some people have been working from home for a year now. For me, it's been 8 months. At the same time, certain businesses are flourishing, whereas others are not doing so well. And these businesses that aren't doing so well due to COVID oftentimes end up in disputes. And while it's an unfortunate situation, I do actually see a number of these disputes slowly coming to arbitration. We've already had a couple of inquiries from clients that have asked for legal assessments that basically show whether or not they will prevail in such a dispute. And even though every single one of our legal assessments so far have shown the clients, yes, you will prevail, they have chosen to not yet commence arbitration. But because they have these legal assessments in their pockets, it's pretty much there. And they're going to be ready to commence once things stabilize, hopefully post-COVID pandemic. And yet, once they have the money, they will still commence the arbitration. So sorry, to answer your question, yes. I do believe that these COVID disputes are going to eventually end up in arbitration if they haven't already.
Right, right.
Thank you, Sherlin.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you now, so you're currently a partner in the International Arbitration and Litigation team at Withers. Can you please tell us a bit more about your role? How long have you been a partner for? And how is it to be a partner?
Well, you guys timed this interview perfectly because it is actually my 1-year anniversary from when I joined Withers. Thank you. I think I got to get some kind of kudos out of this. I didn't put the Withers background on, so let's go a little bit into Withers, which is a great international law firm which originated in 1890 in private client and wealth. So we weren't initially known for our commercial disputes practice, but we were and still are quite strong when it comes to private clients, tax, and wealth. I know we have an office in the BVI. My colleagues would like to say hi to you. They're a bit jealous, actually. They just reached out to me last week and asked me if I knew you guys. I said, actually, I'm going to be in an interview with them next week. But what I've been brought on to for Withers is Withers has been slowly expanding its commercial disputes team since the hire of Hussein Hayari in 2000 and I would say 14 now. He was hired on to basically expand the international disputes team, which he has. With his hire, he's also been joined by Emma Lindsay in New York. They recently, in 2018, hired a number of disputes practitioners in Singapore and Hong Kong with the intention of growing. And one of these disputes practitioners brought me on board 1 year ago in order to expand the international arbitration team specifically. So what I've been doing in the last year has, I've been fighting COVID. That's one thing. One thing that COVID has kind of prevented us from doing is doing our road trips and leaving. But what we have seen is that our capabilities in the commercial disputes in Asia has significantly expanded. We recently hired more people in Singapore. And because of this growth, we're able to handle our clients' disputes here in Asia, as well as in the US and Europe. And that's what I've kind of been doing. I've been coordinating and trying to grow the practice even more in spite of these difficult times.
Yeah.
Well, that's great.
So reflecting on your journey to become a partner, what 3 words would you use to describe the experience of your journey?
Yes, remember, if we have to tune out, record, or whatever, revise, you let me know. But I did finally come up with 3 words that I think I am going to use. The first word is adventure. It's been quite an adventure getting to this point in my career, and I know that it's not anywhere close to over. I think it's actually the beginning. But the reason why it has been an adventure is because I was born in Taiwan. Then my parents, believing in the American dream, moved me to America, California, where I then grew up and did my education there, did my law school. But then somehow this world of arbitration through the Vis Moot came into my life, and I got taken away to Europe, where I did my Master's of Law program with Patricia Shaughnessy at Stockholm University. Then I went down to Switzerland and worked with Pierre Carrère in his independent arbitrator practice. And then somehow I moved all the way back to Asia in Hong Kong, where I first worked with the ICC, Court of Arbitration, but you would think that's it, but no. In between that, from Hong Kong, I moved over to New York to help establish the case management team there. And my parents were actually quite happy because they said, ooh, she's coming back to the American dream where we started this entire adventure. Not so much, because soon after I then moved to Vienna, where I got to work in-house, particularly in just international disputes. And then 3 years after that, I moved back here to Asia, where I have stayed put for the last four years now. And I'm back in private practice. So adventure for sure, because my parents were kind of, in the end, they didn't regret anything, but they did kind of wonder whether or not it was all worthwhile to uproot their entire family, move to the US, and then now they're all back in Asia. So here we are today. Oh, sorry, that's one word. I have two more words, right? Okay, so education. It's, you also kind of realize that this path and this adventure is an everlasting educational experience. You can always learn more. There's never enough, right? Every day I'm learning something new, whether it's professionally or personally. I learn something new, whether it comes to an arbitration case, dispute with a client, or perhaps even just, admin and stuff going on in the firm. So that would be the second word. And I think the third word definitely is perseverance. The adventure, as everyone knows, and the educational experience, basically, you have to persevere in order to get to where you want. And I know Hana knows this personally as well. And Janette, I'm sure you have the same experience. There's a lot of supporting people in this world, and I'm very fortunate to have them as friends. But at the same time, you make your enemies. It doesn't matter how nice and how wonderful of a person you think and hope that you are. There's always some type of a different perspective, and there's always somebody or something there that will be an obstacle. And if you really want to get to your ultimate goal, you just need to persevere and you need to fight through. And you will, I mean, I am a firm believer that you will end up where you need to be so long as you stay with it.
Thank you so much. That's awesome.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, my three words.
Such a remarkable journey.
They were the best words.
Yeah,
Really, I'm impressed.
I love it. I love it.
I mean, I knew you would choose the best words, obviously. Now, Sherlin, we wanted to ask you, why do you love the most about arbitration? And can you please tell us a bit more about your experience at the Vis Moot and the Moot Alumni Association? And you just mentioned it quickly before, so we would love to hear more about that.
Arbitration, international arbitration is, to my understanding, the only field in law where you can practice anywhere in the world. I mean, I am California and New York qualified lawyer. I am registered as a foreign lawyer in Hong Kong, but I have been able to practice as a lawyer or legal counsel, whatever you want to call it, in Asia, and I've been doing it in Hong Kong. I was in Vienna, Austria, Sweden, Switzerland, New York. Even, I've done things in Germany. I've gone to Singapore, Thailand, and you would never be able to have this opportunity in any other field, to my understanding. But arbitration gives you that ability. And as long as you have a good, legal background where you can understand the facts, analyze and defend your client, you will be able to find a job in whatever jurisdiction you end up with. I know that sounds very, very theoretical, but I think I am actually evidence of that actually happening. Moot Alumni Association, Vis Moot, I mean, what can we say? That's my life. I hope if I have one everlasting impact in the arbitration world, I really hope it's my impact as president of the Moot Alumni Association, and also currently a director or a member of the Vis East Foundation, but very active also in Vis Vienna. The Vis Moot competition is what introduced me to arbitration. Vis Moot competition has two, one in Vienna, one in Hong Kong. And it basically is the largest international moot court competition. Before I get objections, I know Jessup is also probably one of the largest, but Jessup has multiple rounds, whereas Vienna and Hong Kong just have one final competition.
It's more public international law. So for arbitration, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Exactly, and I love that. And so what I did is I discovered the Vis Moot when I was a third year in law school in San Diego. It was a very difficult time financially, but hey, who was going to turn down an opportunity to go to either Hong Kong or Vienna? I loved competing, so that's where I was. I ended up in Vienna. Out of 300 and I think 65 schools, San Diego for the first time moved on to the round of 32. I like to tell my husband all the time that we beat out his university, Freiburg University, which is also known as the gods of this Moot competition. And the Moot Alumni Association basically is the organization that puts together all of the alumni, the Mooties, the arbitrators, the academics, and we organize the social events during the week, legal trainings and seminars during the year, and we also just kind of keep that network and keep things going. So I just learned this year that we technically should have 30,000 members, because that's how many people should have gone in and out of the Moot. We don't, but don't worry, that's my new goal. We're gonna get closer, but we're well over 5,000. And just one last thing, and I think my husband's going to kill me, but why do I love arbitration and why do I love the Vis? Without the Vis Moot, without the MAA, I would not be here professionally. It was the Vis Moot that introduced me to arbitration. I would not have the network of friends that I have these days. I mean, Hana, you're one of them. Janette, you've just become one of my friends' network. I hope that's okay with you.
Thank you so
And my
much.
husband, I met my husband at the Vis East. So
Yeah,
here we go.
that's amazing.
Okay, so what do you think are some common misconceptions about arbitration that you would love to just debunk?
One thing, I actually had a nice discussion with one of our senior partners at Withers, and she's amazing. This woman has 40 years under her belt and is one of the greatest practitioners in Asia. But as soon as I joined, the first words out of her mouth was, "Sherlin, I really like you. I think, you're great at what you do, but arbitration, it's not worth it. You can't, it's difficult to enforce and you can't really get anywhere with arbitration. You need to go to litigation. That's the way that you can get the court to enforce, any order and make sure that people listen." And on the one hand, she's right. We all know in arbitration, we can't force non-parties to an arbitration to, for example, submit to testifying or submit documents in support of evidence. But at the same time, arbitration is probably one of the better routes of resolving international disputes because it gives both sides the comfort of having some type of neutral venue that they've both decided to submit to. It's also, we have the New York Convention, so you don't have to worry about your award not being enforceable. I mean, the New York Convention keeps getting new signatories on like every quarterly basis. And I know that right now, I'm going to get this wrong, I think we're over 180 countries. We might actually be over 200. But I mean, it is a growing field, and arbitration really is, I think, probably the best way to resolve at least international disputes.
Thank you, Sherlin. And now we know you specialize in cross-border corporate disputes with a particular focus on joint venture and shareholders disputes. Considering the last 3 years, what would you say are somewhat common type of disputes in your area of expertise?
We've seen a lot of disputes as a result of insolvencies, and that gets a little bit tricky. I think it was the BVI that recently had a large case with respect to the interchange between insolvency and arbitration. So that's been something that we've been kind of caught up in particular since COVID. But what I've also really seen a lot of in the last few years, and I think this is something that has nothing to do with COVID, but is just kind of a typical commercial dispute. Again, the joint ventures and shareholders disputes, particularly with publicly listed companies that have entered into joint ventures worldwide, and they just end up having differences with their joint venture partners. And because these are international joint ventures, you oftentimes see arbitration agreements. So I've been embroiled in those types of disputes. I've also seen recently a lot of supply chain management disputes.
Okay.
That I think is a direct result of COVID, in particular. So the Panama Canal crisis, we've already started to see effects of that. And we've already gotten a number of inquiries on how is it considered a force majeure? How do they basically protect their rights, for example, for goods that were delivered late? Or what about the other side? What about the poor sellers who unexpectedly and unforeseeably got their containers stuck due to this blockage? So these have been a lot of the disputes that we've seen. Another thing that I've seen more commonly, and I think it might be just because of the clientele, but I've seen a number of aviation disputes. I had 2 arbitrations involving aviation companies. I know, I was very surprised myself. I can now consider myself somewhat of an aviation specialist, although I can't really say
Great.
that.
We love
But
to
it's
hear
been
that.
fun.
Very exciting.
So I read in your profile that your career has given you the ability to view disputes from all possible roles. So I'm curious to know, how would you define the way that an arbitrator thinks?
It kind of depends. So I had the fortune of working, so most of my time with tribunal secretary roles was with Pierre Cadet, who was one of the founding fathers of arbitration in Switzerland. This was now a decade ago that I got to do most of my tribunal secretary work. But Pierre actually really surprised me in that, you know, a lot of people think the arbitrator is just a judge, and that they see things just as a normal judge would. And on the one hand, they do. But on the other hand, because arbitrators are, generally speaking, they've been practitioners, but oftentimes you also see certain experts, right? People who have been in-house counsel in companies, pharmaceutical companies, or technology companies. You also see non-lawyers who act as arbitrators. So what I've really seen with arbitrators is that they're able to see the overall dispute. They don't just see the legal arguments. They see what is commercially going on, but also maybe the technical aspects and just the overall picture. And in my mind, if you pick a good arbitrator or arbitral tribunal, it really helps the parties in the end, because we as lawyers, we like to say, you know, legally you've got this, legally you've got that, and everything kind of depends on the particular fact pattern and what the law says. But in arbitration, I've also seen, you know, there's this possibility of looking at the overall commercial picture. What was the ultimate goal of the parties? What do the parties still want now? And as an arbitrator, they're able to kind of do that balance and not only give in and weigh in on the legal aspects, but also help, I think, the parties reach an agreement that will allow them to continue working together.
Interesting.
Yeah. And to follow up on that, in your opinion, Sherlin, what makes an arbitrator a good one?
Somebody that can see the overall picture. I think somebody that that sees everything. I also used to work for a judge, or I was a judicial extern, and she was great. She was amazing. She was the first female judge in Nevada. But I think the difference that I saw there was they had so many cases go by on a daily basis that, you know, they could only really look into whatever was in front of their file and what was pleaded before them. Whereas as an arbitrator, and as you guys will know, when you appoint an arbitrator, you need to take a look also at their availability and whether or not they're able to devote the time, you know, to this particular arbitration. So I think what makes a good arbitrator, obviously, in addition to the obvious skills and capabilities on the topic, is the overall picture, the dedication to the case, and just trying to reach what is best for the parties.
Yeah, I think it's good that you mentioned that, because there's so many arbitrators who are overbooked, and then there's delay in cases and everything. So yeah, the fact, like, to insist that it's important for them to be available and dedicate the time is extremely important.
Yeah.
So Sherlin, you mentioned earlier on that you also worked at ICC, International Court of Arbitration, in both Hong Kong and New York, where you were a founding member of the Case Management Office. What was that experience like?
The ICC, and again, as you guys know, you always have your institutional family. I will say this, my time at the ICC was probably the time where I gained the most experience in international arbitration. During my time there, I was fortunate to work with an amazing team in Hong Kong. And it was a good thing, because we literally were in the office from 8 a.m. till midnight, 5 days a week. And even on the weekends, there were days that we had to go in, because at the time that I was at the ICC, we were only 8 case management teams, and our team in Hong Kong had over 200 cases. And we shared the cases. So it wasn't like we got to split 40-40 or whatever they have now. It was 200 that we shared together. But working at the ICC really gives you the big picture, or working at any arbitral institution gives you the big picture, because you see the beginning of the case, you see how the case develops, and you see the end of the case. You even see certain aspects of enforcement, because oftentimes, for example, jurisdictions such as China requires that the final award be legalized by the institution. So they always come back, and you're always involved in even that stage of the arbitration. So working at an institution really probably gives you the best picture of how international arbitration really is. And I mean, as you guys know, the institution is also basically the security. You're looking at every piece of correspondence. You're looking at everything that goes back and forth between the parties and the tribunal. And you basically have to monitor that the due process rights are observed. The tribunal is doing what it needs to do. There's equal protection, fairness, etc. So you really will never get that experience again once you leave the institution.
Very true. And how is it in New York when you actually set up the case management team?
That was crazy. I think the difference is because we went to New York, the ICC office, Hana, in New York opened in the coldest winter, I think, that New York had for 100 years. So there was like 10 feet of snow and we couldn't even get to the office. I remember hating going on that subway. But it was a great experience because, again, we had a really good team. So the ICC recruited in for the council somebody who had been at King and Spalding for 7+ years, and she was great because she had an amazing background in tribunal secretary work and legal counsel work. The team, the deputy counsels, consisted of myself, but also a Canadian because we covered the North America aspect. I think it was interesting. Quite honestly speaking, the reason why it was such an interesting fact is because, or interesting experience, is we had a lot of US cases and we dealt with a lot of US lawyers. And before I get in trouble, I am personally also US qualified, but you see that Americans aren't as used to international arbitration procedure per se as the way that you see it in Europe and in Asia. And quite honestly, I guess you could flip the coin. From an American perspective, they probably think that the Europeans and Asians do things a bit strangely. But it was interesting because a lot of the times of those arbitrations, you saw the American lawyers being litigious as if they were in a US court.
This
So
is
that
so
was
funny.
probably
We had
fun.
this conversation.
I'm listening to her and I'm thinking the same thing.
We had this conversation
Okay,
with
good.
John Beachy, actually. You're literally saying the same thing, which is great because we all agree on that.
Yeah.
And I mean, they're learning, don't get me wrong. And I mean, they've got the AAA and ICDR, whatever, CPR, et cetera, and JAMS. So they are learning more and more. But I think when the ICC set up shop, what was it, 2014, it was still somewhat considered new. I mean, I think my favorite time was when we got 50 cases filed all within 2 weeks by one lawyer. And each of those cases didn't have an amount in dispute more than $20,000 US.
Oh, wow.
That was interesting. So, and they were very litigious. So I was like, oh, I wonder how much you're paying your lawyer for that. But
yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
Okay, so well, I have to say, I admire this because for someone who I can only speak one language and that's English, obviously. I admire the fact that you speak multiple languages, Hana, too, as well, you multilingual people. But you speak Mandarin, English, Spanish, and German. Which turned out to be your hardest for you to master? And is there a fifth that you're anxious to learn?
well, before I get called out for being a liar, because I know this is on the website, and I do speak each of those languages to a varying degree. Okay. I am only native and fluent in Mandarin and English. I have business professional proficiency in Spanish and German. I just passed another, I guess, official exam. So I do speak German to an extent, but I also like to pretend that I don't when I'm in a meeting. Because it just gets so complicated. And that would also be the language that was and still is the most difficult to get a hang of. You would think being married to a German would help, but being married to a German professor basically means when he tries to, or when he kindly corrects my German, I just start speaking English or Chinese, because that puts him on another setback. But yeah, so German has been the most difficult to learn, and it's this das, like you've got feminine, masculine, neutral for these articles before a word. My goodness, like the Chinese, we don't even have plural, past tense, or future, right? I had a difficult enough time in English when I had to learn what past tense, what future, what is plural. But then in German, I mean, Spanish has it, but Spanish is less difficult, whereas German, you can never guess that article. So I just get it wrong all the time. Yeah, so that was the most difficult language. I am still learning it officially. That's fun. But if I would like another language, I think I've always wanted to learn Italian.
Oh, I thought you would say French. I'm so disappointed. point, Sherlin.
Hana, how do you say 88 in French?
88, 88, yeah, it doesn't make sense. It's like
That's
428.
what, exactly. So it requires me to do math. So French, no thank you. We're going to go to another language. But I mean, Italian is very similar to Spanish.
Yeah,
So if I
And
could
to
hopefully get Spanish down again, and
Absolutely.
English, exactly.
yeah, very true.
That's cool. Cool, cool.
And actually, a more serious question in the sense that we wanted to know if this has ever been a time in your career where you were discriminated against due to your ethnicity or gender, and if so, unfortunately, how did you handle it?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a given, particularly I'm Asian, I'm female. I grew up in the US at a time when Asians weren't very, I mean, Asians were prevalent where I lived. My parents were smart and they kind of chose an area in California that was full of Asians. But I mean, oftentimes I remember being discriminated at a time when somebody in law school, actually, I was down in San Diego, which is a very less Asian city. I was shopping in a grocery store and some older lady basically turned around and yelled at me and asked me if I spoke English. And I don't even know why she turned around and yelled at me. And I know this isn't even a professional situation. This sticks out in my mind mainly because I was in law school, right? And I was thinking, good God, I'm in law school in California and I grew up here. What are you turning around asking me whether or not I speak English? But because of my Asian culture and my mother always telling me to be nice to your elders, I couldn't really stand up for myself. Also at the time that it was, you know, not as common to stand up for yourself. So I actually apologized to her. It's kind of, I know it's an automatic, you hear it a lot and everything out of my mouth. And my friends always tell me this, like, why is apologizing the first words out of your mouth? I have a great mentor at the firm here at Withers right now. And she's, one time she had taken me aside just to kind of give me a tip, right? Just to say, you know, I want to ensure that you know your strengths and you stand your ground because you are good at what you do. And my first words to her was, I'm so sorry you have to take me to the side to tell me this. And she just, she's a great mentor because she immediately said, Sherlin, you need to stop apologizing. This is something where I've taken you aside to, you know, further strengthen you as a female because I see, you know, your capabilities. So no, there is no apology. You only apologize when you did something wrong and you haven't. So sorry, that kind of jumped to something else. But I mean, one thing I would like to chime in about Withers in case I do get in trouble by either the firm or you guys, but in the Hong Kong office, we are 80% female.
Oh,
it is, yeah, 80% female. And I think partner-wise, we are 70% female in Hong Kong. Worldwide, that's been a bit more diluted now that we keep expanding so quickly. But the last time I checked, we are still, I think, over 50% female partners in
That's
Withers
amazing.
Worldwide.
That's
Sorry?
That's such a great example for law firms like
Yeah, it's
worldwide.
amazing. When when my CEO of disputes was interviewing me and hiring me, he asked me, he said, you know, why are you leaving? Because I was pretty sad. I was somewhat happy, you know, with where I was in my career. And he said, why do you want to leave? And why do you come to Withers where you have to build this practice? And I said, well, I went on your website and, you know, all I saw were female partners. And it just made me wonder, I wanted to come meet you just to see, do you really, you know, is it a supporting a female thing? Is it because you guys recognize the talent? Is it because you just happen to see, you know, great talent in females? And he's like, well, that's kind of all of the above. Like, he obviously doesn't discriminate. He's got a lot of male good partners and associates, but he has said that, you know, in his 35-year career, he's seen most of his females do really well, and he is happy to promote them. I know our co-head of arbitration, I may get this wrong, but Eleni, she's great in London, but she worked with our CEO from the time she was an associate. And he saw the talent in her and he built her up. And I know that's a common story you hear now, perhaps, but it wasn't very common at the time. And I still actually think it's something that needs more support, but Withers has that support. Sorry, totally out of your question, but that happened to me in law school when I was in San Diego. Another time, I have often been discriminated, but I would call it unbiased, unconscious bias, because I was a female. So I worked in Switzerland and I worked in Austria. Those are two very old school European countries. And oftentimes you would see me probably always enter into rooms last behind all the males, or I would be asked to get coffees or teas, etc. I would always be asked to take the notes, things along those lines. But I had the benefit, and how we addressed that was I had two great bosses. My boss in Switzerland, Pierre Cadet, anytime somebody asked me to bring a coffee or to take notes or someone, he would say, no, she's a lawyer. She's here with me. She's my tribunal secretary. She will do legal work. So he was always fully supportive. In Vienna, I had another great boss, Gerhard Klingenbrunner, who did the same thing. He stood up for me. I mean, honestly, for Gerhard, he didn't see it as much, and he didn't even have to. He's one of those really, really smart lawyers, but kind of all over the place. So, he knows exactly where things are, but when you walk into his office, you're like, oh, everything is crazy, right? So he's one of those people. So he didn't actually really notice when it came to situations because I was a female, I was treated differently, but he would just come in and say, Sherlin, she's a US qualified lawyer, one of the brightest ones on the team, and just put me front and center and make me just do legal things and not allow anyone to have me do non-legal work. So I guess I didn't have to address those particular situations because I had the benefit of working for very wonderful bosses.
That's amazing to hear that you had so many great mentors and that you are now a mentor, because I consider you a mentor for sure. So.
But not that much of a mentor because we're so close in age, right?
Oh, come on. It's not a question of age. You're very close in age.
I love it. No, we are not close in age. That's just a joke, but I love that you say that.
All right, so Sherlin, I think that's all we have time for today. But before we let you go, we have to know one of the most important things ever. What team are you on? Is it Suits or How to Get Away with Murder?
Oh my goodness. So I moved away from the US like a decade ago, right? I really liked the first 2 seasons of How to Get Away with Murder, but then they stopped it on Netflix where I was, and I just didn't get a chance to go back.
It's
and
back
Suits,
watch it. It's back on Sherlin.
it's good, right? That's okay. So I have to. And Suits, I mean, it's not real, but I really like it because it reminds me of LA and everything. And they just all look so cool. And Meghan Markle's on it. Yeah, sorry, none of the above. If you really need to know, I'm more of like a Walking Dead iZombie person.
Oh, okay. Nice.
All right. Thank you so much, Sherlin. It's been a pleasure to talk to you and get to know you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you guys for this opportunity. I can't wait to come visit you, and you guys can come visit us once you get your vaccine.
Definitely.
Please do. And now we know that Wizards has an office in the BVI, so all more
I'm going to put you guys in touch.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you guys. Have a good day.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Thank you, Sherlin.
Bye.
Bye. Well, Sherlin, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today on Arbitration Life.
Yeah, that was cool. I love her. She's great.
It was really lovely to speak with Sherlin today. She's such an amazing lawyer, as like you probably know now, a really good friend of mine, a mentor as well. And I do hope that you enjoyed our conversation as much as we did.
For more Arbitration Life, please be sure to hit the subscription button, plus follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Arbitration Life.
Bye.
Arbitration Life is sponsored by the British Virgin Islands International Arbitration Centre, meeting the rapidly evolving dispute resolution needs of arbitration users worldwide. The BVI IAC is a neutral, impartial, efficient, and reliable dispute resolution institution and conference center located in the Caribbean, Latin America, and at the crossroads of the Americas. For more information, visit bviiac.org.